Okay, brilliant. I hope you're all sufficiently clued up in what the boss is and what it's all about. I would like to take another quick minute or two to shill some things that I need to shill. If you are looking to get a little bit lit tonight, I'm not 100% sure what lit means. My younger sister used it once, but here we are. If you are looking to get lit tonight, we do have the official opening party of ETHDenver at Mission Ballroom. It's 8:30 p.m. for VIPs. It's 10:30 for general entry. You can still sign up at near.org/partywithoutlimits. If you're a hacker and you're looking to take home a share of a prize pool of more than 60,000 USDC, head to near.org/Denver and check out all of our incredible bounties and more. If you didn't catch a t-shirt when I threw them out, and you're looking to go upstairs sometime soon, or tomorrow, or the next day, or the next day, head to booth AU, and you will find the wonderful team from the Near ecosystem, Pagoda, and wonderful ecosystem projects as well. If you ask them politely, they will give you some incredible swag, and they'll onboard you to the wonderful ecosystem of Near. But we are not yet finished. We have some more wonderful speakers, some wonderful panelists. If you're chilly in Denver, that's good, because this next one is a fireside chat between the CEO of the Near Foundation, Marieke Flament, and the wonderful Haseeb Qureshi from Dragonfly Capital about why the future of Web3 is still so bright. So if you could put your hands together and give a big cheer, we'll bring them on board and we'll talk all about it.
Here.
Okay.
Oh, you get a t-shirt.
I get a t-shirt. Amazing.
So that's great. We don't have slides to put up, so that's going to work, right?
Easy.
It's amazing to do this. It's the first time we actually met in person.
This is correct.
Yeah. I mean, we just heard about actually the blockchain operating system and this evolution for Near. So what do you make of it? What's your take on that?
So it's a fascinating idea because, if you look at the way that blockchains work today, for the most part, they're mostly a back-end technology, right? It's something that's totally obscured from the user, and the way that a person is going to be interacting with this stuff. Back in the day, people used to talk a lot about how, AI is going to be very visible in people's lives, and blockchain is going to be invisible. It's going to be something kind of in the back end. Maybe your refrigerator or your air conditioning is going to use blockchain in some way. And that was very, very early days, right? But I think what the idea of the blockchain operating system does is it allows web development and software development to be blockchain-based from top to bottom. And already, I think you guys chatted about this earlier about how there have been instances. I was just chatting with one of the guys from Tornado Cash. One of the examples of a place where having this software live completely in a decentralized way and live completely on the blockchain makes it more robust and more resilient, right? And so I think it's a direction that we need to go. But in order for us to get there, we need scalability. And that's a lot of what Near brings to the table, is having the scalability that you can actually have the entire web stack completely live on chain.
Yeah.
So I think it's a wonderful experiment. I'd love to see it come to fruition.
Yeah, it's actually amazing. We call that pretty revolutionary in our own terms, so great to see that you're also super excited about it. Actually, talking about Near, you've been a very early backer in Near, and I'd love to talk about that story, how that came about, what got you excited about it, and what still gets you excited about Near.
Yeah, okay. So I invested in the seed round of Near a long time ago, many years ago. And at that time, so actually before Near became what it is, Ilya and Alex, who were the two co-founders, it was originally a company called Near.ai, and it was an AI company. And the two of them decided that it was kind of AI winter back then, and blockchain was super interesting. And they were like, actually, all the guys who are building Ethereum and all these blockchains and layer ones, they're struggling with scaling these systems, right? And I remember, I think it was Alex used to work at MemSQL, which was a enterprise database company that dealt with scaling databases, right? And blockchain is kind of a database thing. And so I remember when we first met with them at a coffee shop, and they were just like, yeah, all these Ethereum people are so stupid. They're so incredibly incompetent. How is it taking them this many years and they can't manage to scale this damn thing? And I was like, well, it's a little harder than you might think. There's a lot of rough edges to it, and there's governance, and there's this, and there's that. And they're like, no, it's easy. Look, they sketched out this system back in the day, actually, in the seed round. The pitch for Near was that it was going to be a blockchain that was so efficient and scalable and whatever, but it was going to be so efficient that you could run a full node on a mobile phone. That was the pitch. And I was like, I understand why you think that's a good idea. That's not, no one cares about running blockchains on mobile phones. But their system had a flaw. And I don't remember what it was, but it was something about having to send way too much bandwidth over the wire. And so me and my partner, we were basically like, look, guys, I don't think your design works. It's way too bandwidth intensive. It's not going to work for phones that are not connected to Wi-Fi. Like, I don't think the system works. And they were like, shit. And I remember after that meeting, I was like, oh, these guys think they're way too smart. And so we were like, oh, we're not going to invest in this thing. And then the next day, they sent me a new white paper that they'd basically written in 24 hours. And they was like, oh, we totally changed the design. You're absolutely right. The bandwidth problems are not going to work. Here's this other system. And we were just like, shit, these guys are really fucking fast. They are really fast. They're really sharp. And they get something about how to build complex systems that almost nobody else in the space builds. So back in 2018, there were a lot of layer ones that started back then, right? Avalanche, Algorand, all these guys were building things back then. And the moniker that we used to call these layer ones is that we call them professor coins. Because it was almost always some professor who wrote this paper of this new consensus, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, great, I'm going to bring a bunch of my PhD students, and we're going to build a new blockchain. And this was the first blockchain we'd seen that was being built not by professors, not by some academic invented some new blah, 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 but it was just raw engineering talent. Just fantastic world-scale engineers who are going to build a totally new blockchain and scale it and build it and take it to production as fast as possible. And that's always been the thesis for us behind Near, is that they get developers because everybody in the team is a world-class developer. And that's what got us excited. We're like, look, I don't know what this thing is going to become. And Near really evolved in large part in response to seeing what Ethereum was doing. So when Ethereum decided, hey, we are going to go through this new sharding-based approach for Ethereum 2.0, basically a lot of the ideas that got incorporated into Ethereum 2.0 came from Near. And there was sort of this co-evolution, and we saw Near kind of being at the vanguard of how scaling was going to allow blockchains to scale. And that's what's gotten us excited about Near. It's the same thing with Boss, right? Showing, sort of going one step forward in how blockchains can redefine the way that these things can scale to tens of millions or hundreds of millions of users. That's always been the Near story, and that's what's got us excited from day one.
Amazing. I love the story because it's also a lot, we say very often we're nearly there, and we're never really there. And I think the story you just described is actually exactly that, is that we're nearly there. Changing slightly gears, so I'm very lucky to actually, we catch up quite often over phone calls, and I remember when the whole debacle with FTX happened, I actually turned to you and I was like, and now, now what? What do we do? And you told me it's time for convictions. And that really stuck with me because I was like, I was also looking for some sort of answers in the debacle of what was happening. We say it's time for convictions. And so I was just wondering, what are your convictions as we're going through this bear market?
It's a good question. So the spirit by which I was saying that was that, in the bull market, back in 2021, 2022, it was easy to just be in the right place and to get rewarded for it, right? If you were basically making the right noises, if you were sort of in the right rooms, everyone's token was pumping, everyone was making money, every NFT collection went up. The world didn't require you to take a strong stance and to really believe in something specific about how the world was going to evolve. And that's not true anymore, right? Now, you have to actually have a clear view about where the world is going to evolve, where blockchains are going to be used, what are the applications that matter, and which are the ones that are dead ends. And I think, for myself, the one thing that is the most obvious is that blockchains still are not usable enough and they're not scalable enough, right? And obviously those are fairly low-hanging fruit, but they are, in another sense, the biggest problems in the industry, right? How do you get a normal person to use this stuff? One of the things that was really amazing to me over the last cycle, from 2021, 2022, was how many normal people were getting into blockchains through TikTok, through Instagram, through some guy being like, hey, there's this great NFT, there's this way that you can get on this thing and yield farm this blah, 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 and here's this, basically you had totally normal people just off the street figuring out how to install MetaMask, how to get on Near, how to get on all these different applications, just because they were being told by someone they trusted and someone they were excited about how to use this stuff. Now, how many people who were in that TikTok pipeline fell off because it was too hard, because it was too complicated, because it was too scary, because they just got stuck somewhere and they had no one to ask, right? Like, I would imagine it's probably 50, 60, 70% of people who saw those things and wanted to be like, yeah, I'd love to buy an NFT. I'd love to like go in and like start using some of these applications, but I just don't understand. It's just too hard. My bank account got frozen by the exchange, or I can't get the initial blah, 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 right? Or I don't have a browser and this thing is browser only, right? That is what we need to solve if we want to get to hundreds of millions of users. And then once we have them, then we need to be able to scale to support those hundreds of millions of users. So that's a lot of what, as an investor, I'm looking at over the next couple of years, is how do we get to that level of usability? And then once we have that usability, how do we get to the scalability to be able to support that much bigger influx of users we're going to see next go around?
Yeah, amazing. I mean, that aligns really well also with our convictions. Our conviction is actually, it's time to build for users, right? This is for mainstream adoption. And rather actually that focusing on, TVL or price or things that are not intrinsically on user, actually focusing on monthly active users and some of those metrics that are really important.
It's 100% right. I mean, so in the last market, there was so much fixation on these very simplistic financial metrics, right? TVL was the most obvious one. And you end up getting things like, in Solana, there's this famous story of the McCullough brothers, who basically were building these sort of fake DeFi kind of, rehypothecation protocols that would take stablecoins here, put them also into here, and then you would wrap that, put that into here, wrap that, put that into here, and all of a sudden it looks like you have $10 billion, $20 billion of TVL, when in reality there's $1 billion of things, $1 billion of actual capital in there, right? And why were we spending all this time doing that? We were spending all this time doing that because we managed to get convinced that the metric was the real thing. The real thing is adoption, right? The real thing is creating value for people and solving problems in their lives, which all this TVL recursive bullshit was not doing.
Totally.
Right? And so I think this next phase of blockchain, and it's always happened, at every technological cycle, this happens, where you fixate on some metric that you think is a proxy for the thing you care about, and you just grind that metric until eventually you realize, like, what the fuck did we just build? Like, this is completely useless, right? What is this just kind of Tower of Babel of TVL that we've created? And it drained as quickly as it came. Yeah. And that, I think, is one of the lessons that every cycle teaches you, is you find some proxy, you optimize that proxy like crazy, and then you realize, like, wait, that was not important. And you go refocus yourself on the real thing that matters, which is adoption.
Yeah, and we saw that in Web 2 too, right? Because in Web 2, at the time, you remember, it was all about like having users, and then you got users, and then you didn't do anything.
That's right, that's right. In the dot-com bubble, right?
Exactly,
the dot-com bubble, it was eyeballs.
Yep.
It was this idea that eyeballs are the most valuable thing in the world, and if you can just get eyeballs, then somehow magically you're going to monetize, right? And so you had all these stupid websites that all they did was they made people look at them.
Exactly.
And looking at websites is not how you make value, right? Yeah. You make value by solving problems. Yeah. And it took the internet industry a long time to figure this out, and eventually, of course, they did. And some of the things that had a lot of eyeballs were incredibly valuable, like Google or Amazon. And a lot of things that had eyeballs are completely worthless. And we're coming to that same realization in blockchain as well.
Completely. OK, great. So convictions, it's all about users and usability. Obviously, to get mainstream is going to be super important. AI. So we also talked, I don't know if you remember that, but once ChatGPT was just starting, and I was like, OK, so Haseeb, what do you think about AI? And you said something along the lines of, well, AI is kind of replacing the smart grad from who knows how to do a smart Google search, but blockchain enables to do real different stuff. And so I'm just curious to have your take actually on AI, blockchain, and that intersection. Like, what do you make of that?
Yeah. OK, so the world has been taken by storm by these large language models like ChatGPT that can do things that we generally thought were going to take decades for us to be able to get to that level of competence and intelligence, right? And they're fascinating. They're absolutely fascinating. And it's worth the whole world being fascinated by this thing. They should be, right? But what can ChatGPT actually do that human beings can't do? And right now, the answer is like kind of actually nothing, right? If you are a, let's say like you're a liberal arts graduate from a Ivy League school, and you come straight out of school and you go into consulting or whatever, one of these kind of businesses. Basically, ChatGPT can do what you can do in like 3 hours in internet access, right? That's what ChatGPT is. ChatGPT is going to replace basically interns and associates. That's what it can do, right? Now, it cannot solve more complex problems, right? It can't code up a solution to building an application. It can't do your math homework. Well, it can do some of your math homework, but it's going to make a lot of mistakes. Like it can do some things, but it can't do. It can bullshit extremely well. That's basically what they're very good at. They're very, very good at bullshitting, which is a lot of what people who graduate Harvard with a degree in political science, that's a lot of what they do. So now what can blockchain do, and what is the intersection of blockchain and AI going to do that's fundamentally different? And I think the answer in my mind is actually, there are a lot of things in the short term. They're just coordinating things like labeling, decentralized training. I'm a little bit more skeptical of that. But that's all kind of more back-endy, right? Longer term, what is the intersection of AI and blockchain going to look like? Today, the AIs that we have, if you look at something like ChatGPT kind of looks like an agent. It kind of looks like it's a person, right? But that's kind of a parlor trick. It's not actually agentic, okay? What I mean by that is that there's no persistence in these AIs. You talk to it for a little while, and if you talk to it long enough, it'll forget what it said, because it has this sort of 4,000 token look back of its sort of short-term memory, and besides that, it doesn't know anything. And so if you want to have like a real, if you want to have this idea that an AI is an agent that acts in the world, that makes commitments, that does things, we're not there yet. The models that we have right now, the systems that we have right now, they can't do that. Or if they can only do it in very enclosed environments, and they're not very intelligent. But we will have that soon. Now, how soon? Is that a decade? Is that 2 decades? I don't know. But almost certainly within 2 decades, we're going to have AIs that are acting in the world. And once you have AIs that act in the world, then what will they need in order to act in the world in the way that we act in the world? The answer is money. How do you interact with other agents to solve problems, to negotiate, to exchange value, and to compete over shared resources? We have the answer that the answer is money. Now, are AIs going to be able to open a bank account at JP Morgan? No, of course not, right? There are only 3 things that can own money in the normal world, in the normal economy. Governments can have money, companies can have money, and people can have money. But AIs are going to be here very soon that are going to try to solve problems with money, and they're not going to be able to use fiat money. And so because regulation is not going to catch up. And of course, how do you regulate an AI? How do you get an AI to pay taxes? How do you get an AI to how do you drag them into court and say, hey, you owe this person, you didn't breach of contract? Nothing in our society is set up for AIs to have money. But there's one thing that AIs will be able to handle very, very easily, and that is a private key. AIs will use crypto because they will circumvent the regulatory system that's created around money that was never set up for non-human agents to have money. And that's why I think the most explosive intersection of AI and crypto is simply going to be agents, AI agents using money. And it's going to be fucking weird because you're going to have AIs that are going to offer you money to do things. You might have AIs that employ you because it turns out that they have a better use for your time and energy than a human company does. It might well be that you're driving in traffic and this AI is like, hey, I'll pay you 2 cents if you'll let me merge into your lane. All sorts of exchanges of value, opportunity costs are negotiated using money, and that's going to start happening in your lives within the very near future, and I think that's going to be happening through crypto.
I'm not sure if I'm looking forward to that world. But
I'm not sure it's going to be pleasant, but look, at a certain point, you get used to it. The same way you get used to staring at your phone all day long and using that to mediate your entire life. There's an unpleasantness to it, but there's also a tremendous increase in the amount of things that the average human being is going to be able to do and have access to.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it also nicely ties into obviously the origin story of Near. Which when both Alex and Ilya have actually a background in AI, and with the idea was the name Near is also serendipity is Near. So there's this whole background on that, and we heard earlier from Alex Kidanov also some ideas of how things can start interlocking. But I agree with how you see it coming, which is ultimately AI doing stuff on our behalf, and then how do you do those micropayments? Because opening a JP Morgan account, I mean, good luck to any human already to do that. So to AI, not going to happen.
Yeah.
Let's change a little bit, maybe. So 2022 was absolutely brutal as a year, right? What lessons should we draw from 2022?
What lessons should we draw from 2022? There's a lot of lessons, and I think they carry through for individual subsectors, right? So the NFT people, I think, learned something different than the DeFi people, than the sort of layer ones and the infrastructure people. The biggest theme, I think, of 2022 was around leverage. Obviously, a lot of the really dramatic failures that we saw in the industry were different forms of leverage. And where leverage goes wrong, it's the oldest story in history. I think we can find ways to dress it up and say, well, it's because of crypto has this thing and that thing. But in reality, any time that you have a broad market downturn, which was precipitated by macro and the Fed and inflation and all this other stuff that was going on, that caused a big deleveraging. And that deleveraging, now when protocols deleverage, right? I mean, people talk a lot about how, actually DeFi performed really beautifully and CeFi failed, and that's why CeFi is bad and DeFi is good. And I like that story. It sounds good, but it's a little bit simplistic, right? And the reason why it's simplistic is that almost everything in DeFi is over collateralized, right? On every single chain, there's very little in DeFi that's under collateralized. Almost everything is over collateralized. And if you look in CeFi, the things that were also over collateralized in CeFi also survived, right? Now, there's not a ton of things that are over collateralized, but the ones that did, like the story is actually that over collateralization works, which, yeah, duh, of course it does, right? That's why it's done, because it's safer, but it's less capital efficient. The things that failed overwhelmingly were things that were at the vanguard of that leverage. And now leverage, under collateralization, they're two words for the same thing, right? When you're under collateralized, when you're leveraged, right? Really, another way you could look at it is that you're being extended credit in some way. But another way of saying you're extended credit is that actually your collateral, when you're extended credit, is not money. It's not a hard asset. Your collateral is your reputation. And the idea is that, like, okay, I think you won't default on this loan because if you do, it will be bad for your future earnings. It will be bad for your future reputation. You've got other business partners that you want to keep appearances with. And that's ultimately what our industry was collateralized with. It was collateralized with people's reputations. And it turned out our reputations weren't worth as much as we thought they were. That's really what that means. It really means that our reputations weren't worth as much as we thought they were. And I think if you internalize that lesson and you realize that it's not just that, hey, the industry needs to increase the collateral ratios, and we were making excessive loans, or these protocols were excessively recursively TVL'd or whatever. It's also that the people that we trusted were not sufficiently trustworthy, or we overvaluated our own trustworthiness as an industry. And I think that lesson is a much more difficult lesson to learn because it's less about other people than it is about ourselves.
Yep.
And to me, I think that is one of the biggest lessons from 2022 that we're carrying forward. And a lot of that, I mean, the way that you internalize that is by seeing how many of our heroes as an industry did we end up jettisoning and saying, actually, I loved you, Suzu. I loved you, SPF. I loved you, all these people. We were like, these guys are our heroes. Wait, no, never mind. They're not my hero anymore, right? And you do that enough times and you start realizing, maybe the problem is not them. Maybe the problem is us. And that's, I think, one of the lessons that I'm at least noodling on.
Yeah, I like that lesson. Trustworthiness, how do we build with that for 2023? Yeah. Okay, actually, thinking about the events of 2022, I think it's fair to say that there are repercussions from a regulatory perspective, right? And if you look at what's happening right now, for example, in the US with the SEC, I'm just curious, what's your take on regulation landscape overall globally, but then also what's your advice for people who are building in the space and how to think about that?
So right now, I mean, we're all in the US. I assume not all of you are American, but America right now is probably the most punitive place when it comes to regulation. So when FTX first collapsed, I was really worried that we were going to see a global regulatory backlash against crypto. And everybody was kind of steeling themselves. They're like, oh, shit. It's definitely coming now. We were kind of worried a little bit. Terra collapsed. Oh, that's bad. Oh, okay, 3 arrows. Oh, this is bad. But then FTX was like, oh, my God, this is going to be Armageddon. And actually, it's much more of a mixed bag than that. Now, what do I mean by that? If you look in the US, now here's the thing. In the US, FTX hits really close to home because Sam was an American. And because Sam was American, he was kind of a hometown hero, spent a lot of time in DC, he was on TV, he was big on TikTok, he was on the cover of magazines and billboards. He feels like it was really an American story that FTX failed. Now in reality, most of FTX's business was actually not even here. FTX US was a pretty small exchange. Right? It was a very small market share. Most of their, if you look at their creditor list, most of their customers were in Asia. Right? Their biggest markets were Korea and Singapore. They weren't here. So not that many Americans actually lost money directly from FTX, but the story hit home here. And so if you look globally, ironically, Korea, which was the biggest market that got hit by FTX, Korea is actually very crypto-friendly. Actually, their regulatory stance for crypto is actually looking more positive. Japan, same thing. Japan is actually looking very crypto-positive. Hong Kong, which is sort of the outgrowth of China, just announced that they're opening back up to digital assets to try to compete with Singapore and say, hey, we want to open up to digital assets again. And we just saw a nod from Beijing saying, like, yes, we are going to allow Hong Kong to be this sort of haven, this experiment, to start having crypto be a thing again in Asia. They're seeing what's happening in the US about Gensler trying to close the door on digital assets and saying, OK, well, bring it over here then. Great. We can tell this industry is going to be a thing. And look, not everybody is like excited about crypto because they're like, look, it's kind of weird, it's a mixed bag, kind of invites shady characters. We see that now. But we know it's going to happen. We know this is going to be an industry. And all other things equal, we'd rather have it be here than be owned by the Americans. That's what everybody else in the world is thinking. You even see it in Europe.
Yep.
You even see it with Marieke, right? Like they're not saying, no, all this stuff needs to leave. The only place where that's happening is at the SEC. Even other agencies within the US are taking a more nuanced approach. And you're seeing the same thing among legislators on Capitol Hill. Crypto, by and large, in the US is still very popular. A lot of Americans own crypto. And so I think a lot of what's happening now with Gensler is a function of just the attitude of the SEC. And a lot of these cases, and it's worth remembering, a lot of these cases, like, this is not case law. Bringing a lawsuit against a token issuer is not case law. It has to actually go to a judge. And the judge decides what is law. And so once the closest thing to that is Ripple. Ripple is obviously going to be probably getting to some kind of judgment sooner than later. But every single one of these cases needs to be brought one after another into a federal court of law to decide what is the law of the United States. That will happen. It'll take some time. But until then, the only thing you can do is hope and pray that Gensler is not going to be the SEC chairman in a couple of years. And if so, I think you will see a much more gentle regulatory stance even within the US.
Yeah. So maybe let's actually wrap up with some optimism for 2023.
Sure.
We've talked about mainstream adoption, the fact that actually it's all about the user and usability is super important. I'm just wondering, like, what do you want to see be built in 2023, and what advice do you have for builders who are here as they think about what they can do?
Yeah, I mean, so my advice for builders right now is very simple, which is that, look, crypto right now looks dark. It looks gloomy. It looks like, it's a bear market right now. Almost everybody you respect in the space came into the industry when it looked like that. And actually when it looked worse than it does now. Like, I was amazed coming here that this is the biggest ETHDenver ever. Like, prices have cratered, FTX blew up, like our industry is in shambles, blah, blah, blah. There are more people here than there were last year, when prices were 3, 4, 5x than what they were today, right? Which tells you that people see that crypto is not going anywhere. Crypto is not going anywhere, okay? Just because some fuckhead stole a bunch of money from his customers doesn't mean that crypto is not going to be a thing. Crypto is going to be a thing, and that's why all these people are here. And so the thing that I would say to you is that, look, when we are in the wake of this cloud of FTX and macro and inflation and all this stuff, it's going to be harder to get attention. It's going to be harder to raise money. Prices are going to be lower. Yeah, I get all that, okay? But that will change, right? Mt. Gox was worse than FTX, right? Mt. Gox was like people thought crypto would never come back. They thought it was completely over. And so many years later, we talk about Mt. Gox, just like, oh, man, people are going to sell some Bitcoin and that'll maybe affect the price. That's all people talk about Mt. Gox anymore. It doesn't matter. It's so far in the rearview mirror. And just imagine 5 years from now, your friends are going to ask you, like, yeah, I remember I read about that FTX thing. What was that like when that happened? It's like, oh, it's so crazy. Like, we thought the whole industry was going to end. We thought nobody was going to care about crypto anymore. And people will laugh at this idea that the industry could have been killed because some curly-haired weirdo stole a bunch of his customers' money, right? So give it time. In 3 months, it's going to feel like, even just now, it feels so much less pressing than it did 3 months ago. And 3 months from now, like, I mean, people have short memories. That's the one thing you learn in crypto very quickly. People have short memories. So give it 3 months, give it 6 months, give it a year. And you'll see how quickly the specter of FTX lifts, the way that regulators treat this stuff, the way that banks treat this stuff, the way that investors treat this stuff is going to revert back to the same understanding that, look, crypto's not going away. Technology only moves in one direction, which is that it improves. It gets better. It gets faster. It gets cheaper. It gets more efficient. And that's why it's very difficult, very scary to bet against crypto. And that's why I think you should just continue on building because the environment is only going to get better for you.
OK, last question, one word. Who's the boss?
You're the boss.
No, Near is the boss.
Near is the boss.
Haseeb, thank you so much for this conversation.
Thank you, everybody.